Good morning and happy Labor Day. Thanks for joining me, Pastor Amanda, with our devotion of Hope, Faith, and Joy. And we are looking at chapter 11 of the Gospel of John today. And what we find out, some interesting things happen in here. It's primarily another full story, just like we learned about last week about the blind man was one full story in that chapter. And so we kind of have another one of that builds on itself to kind of give us some deeper spiritual meanings and understanding. And so this particular chapter begins with telling us that Lazarus of Bethany has fallen ill. And he is in the village of Mary and Martha. And then there's this little quippet in verse 2. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Yet that hasn't happened yet. It's not going to happen till chapter 12. And so there's this little, but it's trying to already connect stories and connect dots for us. And so we just have that little kind of cool thing happening there. So anyways, but there has to be this relationship that is already there because everybody seems to know that Jesus loves Lazarus. So that's why Martha and Mary are then able to send word to Jesus so that he can come and help Lazarus. And yet, it's kind of, this interesting thing happens is that Jesus then says to himself, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. But of course, that makes no sense for most of the story. Only Jesus already knows the outcome. And so we see that he's fully aware that there's going to be a work, a sign, a miracle that's going to happen through him, through this particular experience. And so what we find out is that Jesus, who's aware of Lazarus's illness and knows that he's supposed to create a miracle, does not get in a hurry to go visit his friend. It says that he actually stayed in town for 2 days longer. Well, when he does decide to finally go back to his friend Lazarus, his disciples question him on his sanity of going back to the place where he was almost just stoned. And then, of course, Jesus has this wonderful thing about, well, if you walk in the light, you won't stumble. But if you walk in the dark, then you will not experience light. So again, he recognizes that what he's providing is truth and that he cannot be afraid of what he's going to do and what's happening. So he goes on to his friend Lazarus. And what happens is that they find out that now Lazarus has been dead for 4 days and is in the tomb. And when word gets around town that Jesus is heading into town, and he's actually headed towards the tomb. He's not headed to the house. Like, Jesus already has a clue what's going on here. Like, he's headed towards the tomb. And then Martha comes out to him. And she has this interesting statement that she says that if you would have been here, he would not have died. So there's, in a sense, there's still a lot of faith in her statement. Like, she knows that Jesus can heal. But at this point in time, no one's seen anybody been raised from the dead. And so he has this conversation, and Jesus says, your brother will rise again. And of course, she affirms, she believes in the resurrection after life. But then Jesus has another one of his I am statements. And he goes, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. That was verse 25. And so everyone, in verse 26, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? And Martha says, yes, I do believe that you're the Messiah. And so what happens is that she catches on. She's like, something's cool about to happen. And so she runs out to her sister Mary and says, come. And Mary jumps up and goes with Martha to meet Jesus. Now, of course, Mary was surrounded by people, and then she kind of got up. Like, Martha didn't make a big announcement. She just kind of whispered in her ear. And so this crowd is like wondering why Mary got up and just ran away. So she's got a crowd following her. So anyways, Mary comes to Jesus. She kneels at his feet. And she says the exact same thing that Martha did. Like, if you would have been here, you would have saved him. And it says then that Jesus saw her weeping. He saw all of the people that had come with her were weeping. And in verse 35, we have the shortest verse in our Bible that says Jesus wept. He too is just overcome by the emotion, which is good for us to see. Even though he knows what he's going to do, and even though he knows that there's a miracle to come, he truly can experience the pain that we all feel when we lose a loved one, and the loss of hopes and dreams and shared moments and experiences. I mean, Jesus actually felt it. It wasn't that he was cold-hearted going, well, I'm going to fix this. He truly was overcome with love and affection. And that reminds us of Jesus's humanity. He really does walk with us. He didn't walk above us. He walks with us. And so, and then of course there are people who said, of course, they were like, well, see, he loved him too. And then, you know, people, again, they always like to bite and twist the, And so some people says that could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? So there's this kind of like poking at him a little bit. But then finally, Jesus says, hey, open up the cave. Now, we're going to have to start remembering when Jesus was buried, he also was buried in a cave. And so we kind of see this glimmer, this shimmer of what's going to happen. And so this cave is opened up. But of course, Martha's like, it's going to stink in there. He's been gone for a while. But Jesus is like, do it anyways. And so he then goes on and says, Lazarus, come out. And it says then that the dead man came out. And then he's bound up in all of his death wraps. And Jesus says, unbind him and let him go. It's that moment of realizing you're the walking dead, and that you kind of have to let off your old clothes and be put on new clothes. And then, of course, we remember that in the resurrection, we're going to find that Jesus's linens are folded over here on the side. He's not wearing his death clothes. His death clothes remain at the tomb. And we'll talk about that when we get there, because that's another interesting point. But for today, we see that he was able to bring a dead man alive. And so it says then in verse 45 that many who had come believed in him. But of course, some of the Pharisees and, called a meeting, and they realized that this man's calling himself the Messiah. The people are calling him Messiah. And that the problem now becomes that there could be political repercussions for this. Because if Jesus claims to be a Messiah or a king, people could think that he's going to overthrow the Roman Empire. which then will cost the Pharisees potentially their jobs. It could bring death to all the people. So they start saying to themselves that we have got to protect the people. If we kill Jesus, we'll save the rest of the people from political unrest. And so that's how they start devising their plot. No more about trying to go after his teaching so much, but as considering him a rebel rouser, a political anarchist, so to speak. And so Jesus realizes now that things are turning. And so it says in verse 54 that Jesus therefore no longer walked about openly among the Jews, but went from their town called Ephraim to the wilderness, and he remained there with his disciples. So Jesus is kind of trying to stay low and bide his time while he has it. But it's getting time for his arrest to come. The plan, they figured out how to catch him. It has nothing to do with his teachings. It has nothing to do with his miracles. It has nothing about himself calling himself the Son of God. It is now about political unrest, and they have to protect their position in the Roman Empire. And so that's the downfall at this point in time. But I think what I like most about this particular chapter is just recognizing Jesus's humanity and how he connects with us in a very compassionate way. And so that's your hope and maybe your joy for today, this beautiful Labor Day. And I hope you enjoy your day, and I will see you tomorrow when we look at chapter 12. Thanks for joining me with Hope, Faith, and Joy Daily Devotions.